So the demo is going to look like we essentially will have Jenkins. We're going to be calling the Provar Ant script from Jenkins. That's going to in turn retrieve the Provar project from Git. And then Provar is going to execute our Git project. Once it's executed, it's going to be generating an email and also a JUnit output. And that's in turn will end up back in Jenkins, and obviously email goes over to my inbox. So this is Provar desktop, and what we've got set up is a existing test. So this is the test we're going to use to start putting this onto our Jenkins. Now the first thing what we need to do, I now need to share this project. So I'm going to right click, and what we'll see down here is team, and then what I'm going to choose is share project. What we're going to do is create a local repo first, and I typically create them in GitHub, and then what I'm going to do is give it a name. If we go ahead and choose finish here, what we see is we've got all the values we need, and at the moment this is now going to associate this to a local repository. So this physically will exist, these files, underneath my GitHub directory or my C drive. The key thing now though is it's not associated with a repo in my GitHub cloud, so I do need to sort of associate that. But what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to choose to start updating the ignore file, because there's some files in Provar we clearly need to be sharing, and there's some files we don't want to share because they're transient. And a good example, of course, would be things like log files. So what we can choose to do is team ignore for them. Also, we can do the same for log state here. We don't want the bin directory, because the bin directory is something which you would compile and create each time. That's quite an important point, because what you do find is you need to use the local Java version for compiling. What we're now going to do is create our Ant task. Essentially, if we go ahead and choose to do run as Ant, we get this screen here. Now this is the information that Jenkins is going to use to find out all about the project, which test we want to run, and what our results are going to look like. So the first thing is it's telling me the name of the file, build.xml. It's telling me where the results are going to go. And then also we can choose how we're going to handle results handling. Now, if you were running this locally and the default, as you can see, is just increment, this is where you might see results, (1), (2), or brackets 1, 2, 3, and you keep getting this new folder each time. When you're doing it via Jenkins, you wouldn't really want that, because you just want to overwrite the thing each time. So that's where we can choose a second option, which is overwrite it exists. In general, we've got two options here. The first option is just talking about Provar library. Now that's on the assumption that basically Provar is already installed. And I'd say on Windows, if we're running this via Jenkins, I would always go for that option. What we do have is the other option is Ant library, which I'm not going to choose now, but the Ant library is the approach where you can actually just copy over the jar files for Provar into the Ant lib. And then that would be where if you're running it on Linux, where you don't have Provar installed. Now, the next thing we're going to do is choose to select our test. So you can see I've only got one test. So I actually could leave it quite easily as the tests folder and run everything in this case. But sometimes you do want a subset and or a particular folder, and this is the way you'd achieve that. And then what we've got is the environment we can run, screen resolution, and also which browser you want to run. We have the concept of test cycle. This is something that associates with the sprint. It means that you can actually get a single report out at the end of the test cycle, even if you've run it at different times, and also with the option of rerunning if there's failures in our test case. And then finally, what I want is an email. So I'm going to configure that here and then go ahead and add a PDF. And then finally, what I'm going to do is before you start moving this onto Jenkins, you would just start Ant execution here and hit the run button. That would actually run it in the command prompt. But for the purposes of time now, what I'm going to do is actually uncheck the start Ant execution and then just hit run. It's now created our build.xml, not executing it right now because we'll do that in a minute on Jenkins. So what we've got now is we've got our build.xml. If you want to have a look at that, now there's nothing stopping you going in here and tweaking this. There's also different options that you'll see on the website about adding memory or doing different things like that. So the next thing what we need to do is put this into our repository by just choosing right click and team commit. What we've got here is all our different files that we're going to choose to commit. So we're going to choose everything, and then I'm going to choose commit and push. Now, what's interesting, of course, is I don't know where my Git repository is. So what we need to do is go and create one. So if we go over to my repos here, I'm going to choose new, create repo, and that's all set up. I'm going to copy this string here, which is the sort of reference to this new repo in the cloud, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. I now need to give it my password. We choose next. We're going to have a master branch. Of course, in the future, you may use branches, and I'd recommend using branches, especially when you do have two different versions of code that you're testing because they're different environments. But for now, we'll just use master. And now that's pushed all my code into my repo. So if we go ahead and have a look at that, we can actually click in and see that I've now got a webinar. You can see all the different files that have just been uploaded a minute ago. And in essence, it's the whole project in Provar. So we're happy with that setup. So in a nutshell, we now have created our project. We've now associated this with and also with our Git. And at any point in time now, if you ever make any changes, you can go into here, you can update your test cases, and each time you just right click and then do a commit. And obviously you're now already associated with that repo, and you'll see those changes coming through. So let's go ahead and look at Jenkins now. So my Jenkins implementation is actually a local implementation, and you can sort of see it's just in a command prompt here, Java -jar, and then you give it the name of the Jenkins war file. And then once you've done that, we're able to have a look at Jenkins really just by going to localhost 8080, and then we'll get to see all my sort of locally stored jobs, which I already have. And also in our case, what we're going to do is create a new one. So if I go into here and choose new item, and then we can choose freestyle project and choose OK. And from here, what we need to do is we need to set up my source code. So I'm going to choose source code management and choose Git. Again, what's important here is to choose our repo. So this is the step that's going to download my project now that I've checked it into Git. And then I choose my credentials. And then we need to do two more steps, the build step. And that is just going to be invoking Ant. You can see this is the name of the project. Beneath that project, it's just Ant and then build.xml. So that should be quite clear about what that value is. And obviously you would update this to be whatever you've called your project. And then finally, the post build step is really around our JUnit. And here, again, we just need to choose where the results are. And in our case, we know that we chose to overwrite. So we shouldn't have to mess around with brackets around 1, 2, 3. We know it should always be the results folder, and then we look for the JUnit.xml output that Provar will automatically create for you when you're running Ant. You don't need to choose that as a reporting option. So finally, we've now got our job. So at this stage, we've got the option to choose build now. So let's kick this off. One thing it will do when we're running via Ant is it will download metadata every time unless you ask it not to. You can say, please cache it for me, and this is quite useful if you've got a large org, but we can also tell it to just grab it every time. And I'd say best practice is to take it every time, because again, you've got to imagine if you're doing this on an overnight basis, what we want to see is that the whole thing is built from scratch and there's no sort of shortcuts. Now what we're waiting for is, you can see that we have our browser, and at this stage, it's going to start launching into our particular create task test. So we're into the test now where it's found all the information it needs. This is just going to run headless. There's no way of us stopping this executing. If we have a look at the rest of the test now, we can see saying build successful. It's now got a test result. That's come about from the fact that we hooked in the JUnit file. So we can go ahead and click into the test results, and we can see the high level view of our tests. We can click into the test case, and then we can see we have a single test case, create task, and pass or fail associated with that. The other thing that we would want to see, it also sent us an email. So we can see I've got a new email here, and what we've got is a pie chart that goes with it. From a very high level, we'll get our start and end time. But importantly, we've now got the PDF file that tells us for this individual test case, the different test steps that will run. If there's any screenshots that would be in here, you can see hyperlinks to the object that was created and also the different granular step times as well.